I'm Melissa, 27, and I never thought I'd have to fight my own family for my lifeline. Nana, my epilepsy service dog, cost $28,000 in fundraising and 2 years of specialized training. She's detected every seizure before it happened, giving me independence I never thought possible. Until last Saturday, when I found her missing and that cold note, gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills. I texted back, understood. They thought they'd saved $100 monthly on dog food. Instead, they just lost $83,000 in annual support, their house, and me. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you've ever felt betrayed by family, hit subscribe to join our healing community. My journey with epilepsy began when I was 15, during sophomore year of high school. I still remember the day of my first seizure, right in the middle of biology class while dissecting a frog. 1 minute I was carefully making an incision, the next I was surrounded by paramedics with concerned classmates peeking through the classroom door windows. The diagnosis came quickly: epilepsy, specifically tonic-clonic seizures that would reshape my entire life. High school became a daily challenge. Despite medication, seizures continued unpredictably. I'd wake up disoriented on the gym floor or in the nurse's office, missing chunks of my day and facing the whispers and stares of classmates who didn't understand. College was even harder. I attempted dorm life, but after 3 emergency calls in 1 semester, I moved back home, continuing my education while living with my parents. The medications seemed endless: Lamictal, Keppra, Depakote, Topamax. Each with its own constellation of side effects that sometimes felt worse than the seizures themselves. Brain fog made studying nearly impossible. Weight gain and hair loss damaged what little self-confidence remained. Through 6 years and 12 medication combinations, my neurologist classified me as having drug-resistant epilepsy, a diagnosis that felt like a life sentence. Independence seemed impossible. Driving was out of the question. Career options narrowed dramatically: no operating heavy machinery, no high-stress environments, no jobs requiring perfect attention to detail during my foggy periods. My parents drove me everywhere well into my 20s, a fact that inspired both gratitude and crushing shame. My family tried their best at first. Mom and Dad supported me through the initial diagnosis, attending every neurologist appointment and diligently researching treatment options. They came from solid middle-class backgrounds. Dad worked as a construction project manager while Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but we always had enough for necessities and small luxuries. Until my brother Jason's gambling problem began eating away at the family finances. It started small in his college years: weekend poker games, sports betting with friends. Mom and Dad dismissed it as harmless fun, even when he'd ask for loans to cover rent or car payments. What I didn't know then was that those small loans had ballooned into massive debts that my parents were quietly covering from their retirement savings. The family dynamic shifted subtly. My medical needs became expensive complications, while Jason's requests were simply helping him through a rough patch. My medications, averaging $400 monthly after insurance, became dinner table discussion topics about cost-cutting. Meanwhile, no one mentioned the thousands disappearing into Jason's black hole of gambling debts. The idea of a service dog came during my darkest period. After a particularly severe seizure that left me hospitalized for 3 days, my neurologist mentioned that specially trained dogs could detect seizures before they happened, sometimes by up to 45 minutes. This early warning could be life-changing, allowing me to take emergency medication, get to a safe position, or call for help. The research consumed me. Service dogs trained for epilepsy detection were rare and incredibly expensive: $28,000 for a fully trained animal. Insurance wouldn't cover it, considering it an experimental treatment. I launched a fundraising campaign through my local epilepsy support group, church community, and online platforms. For 18 months, I sold homemade candles, organized benefit concerts, and shared my story with anyone willing to listen. Against all odds, we reached the goal. The day I met Nana, a gentle golden retriever with intelligent eyes, changed everything. She completed her basic training at a specialized facility in Colorado, then moved in with me for another 6 months of personalized training. We learned to communicate in subtle ways, her nudging my hand when she sensed chemical changes preceding a seizure, her retrieval of my emergency medication, her positioning herself to break my fall if necessary. The first time Nana alerted me to an oncoming seizure, I was shopping for groceries. She suddenly became agitated, pawing at my leg and giving her distinctive warning whine. I abandoned my cart, made it to my car, took my emergency medication, and called my mom. 20 minutes later, the seizure came, but I was safe, prepared, and for the first time, not terrified. With Nana by my side, independence bloomed. I moved into my own apartment 10 minutes from my parents' home. I secured a remote position as a software quality analyst, working flexible hours that accommodated my medical needs. My seizures didn't stop, but they became manageable disruptions rather than life-halting catastrophes. I visited my parents every weekend, bringing Nana, who they initially welcomed. Dad would slip her treats while Mom pretended not to notice. We settled into a new normal that felt sustainable, until the financial strain of Jason's addiction finally broke through the surface of our family's carefully maintained facade. Last Saturday began like any other visit to my parents' home. Nana and I completed our morning routine, her breakfast, my medications, our short walk around my apartment complex where she greeted her favorite neighbors with dignified tail wags. I packed her service vest, special food, medication, and favorite tennis ball for our overnight stay. The drive to my parents' suburban home took exactly 12 minutes. Mom greeted us at the door with her typical Saturday enthusiasm, complimenting my new haircut and fussing over whether I'd been eating properly. Dad called out from the living room where he was watching golf, his standard weekend occupation. Jason had unexpectedly joined for dinner, something that had become increasingly rare as his gambling problems worsened. Dinner felt normal on the surface. Mom's lasagna, Dad's corny jokes, Jason's stories about his sales job. But undercurrents of tension rippled beneath the conversation. Mom mentioned their water heater needed replacement. Dad commented about postponing their anniversary trip. Jason stayed unusually quiet when finances came up, studying his plate intensely. Nana stayed dutifully by my side throughout dinner, occasionally resting her head on my lap. Jason barely acknowledged her presence, something I attributed to his general self-absorption rather than specific animosity toward my service animal. If only I'd recognized the calculating looks he gave her when he thought I wasn't watching. After dinner, we watched a movie together. I noticed Mom counting out my dad's heart medication with unusual attention to the prescription details. "These refills are getting so expensive," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. Dad quickly changed the subject, asking about my latest work project with forced enthusiasm. Around 11, I excused myself to the guest room where Nana and I had stayed countless times before. She settled into her familiar spot at the foot of the bed, service vest removed, but always on duty. I took my evening medications, set my seizure monitor on the nightstand, and fell asleep with the comfortable knowledge that Nana would alert me if anything happened during the night. Morning arrived with unsettling silence. Normally, Nana would gently nudge me awake around 7. I opened my eyes at 8:30, immediately sensing something wrong. The room felt emptier, lacking the warm presence I'd grown dependent on. "Nana?" I called, my voice thick with sleep and growing concern. The note sat on the nightstand, folded once and written in my father's precise handwriting. "Gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills. She'll find a good home. We need to discuss more practical solutions for your condition." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. The casual cruelty of pets when referring to my medically necessary service animal. The dismissal of 2 years of specialized training. The dangerous assumption that my condition could be managed by practical solutions that wouldn't inconvenience them financially. I found my parents and Jason in the kitchen, eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. Mom looked up with rehearsed concern. "Sweetie, we need to talk about more sustainable options for your epilepsy management." Dad cleared his throat. "The dog was costing us every time you visited. Special food, shedding everywhere, taking up space. We're in a tight spot financially, and difficult decisions had to be made." "Nana wasn't your decision to make," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's my medical equipment, not a pet." Jason snorted. "Medical equipment doesn't eat 50 pounds of premium dog food monthly. We're talking about real problems here, Melissa. The family's about to lose the house because of Dad's medical bills." Mom jumped in quickly. "Not lose the house, exactly. But we've had to take out a second mortgage. Your father's heart medication doubled in price, and with everything else." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to encompass their financial difficulties, and subtly toward Jason, the unacknowledged drain on their resources. I felt hollow, disconnected from the conversation happening around me. They continued justifying their actions, explaining the family's needs, the difficult choices, the practical considerations, while I silently calculated how quickly I could leave and begin searching for Nana. "Which shelter?" I finally interrupted. Their exchanged glances told me everything. They hadn't expected this question, or perhaps they'd expected tears, pleading, an emotional breakdown they could manage with practiced parental concern. "Melissa, be reasonable," Dad started. "The shelter will find her a good home. She's a beautiful purebred. Someone will love having her as a pet." "Which shelter?" Each word came out clipped, final. Mom sighed. "Greenfield County Animal Services. But sweetie, they have a 3-day holding period before adoption. She's probably already spoken for." I nodded once, pulled out my phone, and typed the single-word response. "Understood." Then I gathered my belongings, ignored their attempts at further conversation, and walked out the front door. In my car, the panic finally overwhelmed me. My hands shook too violently to insert the key into the ignition. My chest constricted as if bound by iron bands. Without Nana's early warning system, I couldn't tell if this was anxiety or an oncoming seizure, the dangerous uncertainty I'd lived with before her. After 10 minutes of controlled breathing, I managed to start the car and pull out my phone. Greenfield County Animal Services was 30 miles away, a 40-minute drive in the opposite direction from my apartment. I called them with trembling fingers. "Good morning, Greenfield County Animal Services," a cheerful voice answered. "You received a golden retriever surrender yesterday," I said, skipping pleasantries. "Her name is Nana. She's my service dog. I need to confirm she's still there." The pause lasted too long. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't disclose information about surrendered animals to anyone but the surrendering party. Family disputes over pets are very common, and we have policies." "She's not a pet," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "She's a registered service animal for epilepsy. Her training cost $28,000. Please, I just need to know she's safe." Another pause. "I can neither confirm nor deny any specific animal's presence at our facility. Our adoption viewing hours end at 5 today." The message was clear, come quickly. I hung up and pressed the accelerator harder than I ever had before. The 40-minute drive to Greenfield County Animal Services became a blur of highway exits and traffic lights, my mind racing faster than my car. Every minute felt critical. What if someone was already adopting her? What if they deemed her unadoptable for some reason? Service dogs often struggled in shelter environments after bonding so completely with their handlers. I called my friend Rachel, barely coherent through my panic. "They took Nana. My parents surrendered her to a shelter while I was sleeping. I need help." Rachel, always practical in a crisis, asked the right questions. Which shelter? Do you have all her documentation? I'll meet you there. Call your neurologist's office for an emergency statement about medical necessity. With shaking hands, I dialed my neurologist's answering service, explaining the situation to the weekend nurse. Dr. Patterson, my neurologist for 8 years, called back within minutes, outrage evident in her typically calm voice. This is completely unacceptable. I'm sending an emergency medical necessity letter to your email right now. Print it at the shelter if needed. I'm also calling them directly. The shelter parking lot was half full when I arrived, weekend adoptions in full swing. The cheerful yellow building with painted paw prints seemed to mock the emergency unfolding in my life. I grabbed my documentation folder from the glove compartment, Nana's service animal certification, her specialized training records, my medical history, and now Dr. Patterson's emergency letter. Inside, families wandered between kennels, children pointing excitedly at potential pets. The cacophony of barking, meowing, and excited voices made my already frazzled nerves worse. I approached the front desk, trying to project calm authority despite my internal chaos. I'm here about a service dog surrender, I said to the young receptionist. Golden retriever named Nana, brought in yesterday. Her expression shifted to practiced neutrality. Are you the surrendering party, ma'am? No. I'm her handler. She's my registered service dog for epilepsy detection. My parents surrendered her without my knowledge or consent while I was asleep. I'm sorry, but shelter policy prohibits. This isn't about shelter policy, I interrupted, placing my documentation on the counter. This is about federal law. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Nana is classified as medical equipment. Surrendering her without my consent is conversion of property at minimum and possibly disability discrimination. The receptionist blinked, clearly not trained for the situation. Let me get the manager. While waiting, Rachel arrived, giving me a fierce hug before standing beside me like a bodyguard. The shelter manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Carol according to her name tag, emerged from the back office. I understand there's a situation with a surrender, she began cautiously. I repeated my explanation, showing her Nana's documentation and Dr. Patterson's letter. Additionally, my neurologist should have called regarding this matter. Carol nodded slowly. She did. This is unusual. The surrender paperwork was completed by Gordon and Linda Turner. They identified themselves as the owners. They're my parents, and they've never been Nana's legal owners. I have all the original receipts, training documentation, and registration in my name only. I pulled out the fundraising records showing my name as the recipient and purchaser. Carol studied the documents, frowning. Even in complex situations, we have protocols. The animal has been surrendered with signed paperwork. Legally, Rachel interrupted. You're now in possession of stolen medical equipment worth $28,000 and potentially interfering with necessary medical treatment for a person with a disability. Carol held up her hand. I understand the seriousness. Let me take you back to see if this is indeed your service animal. The kennel area smelled of disinfectant and stress. Dogs barked frantically as we passed, all except one. In the last kennel, Nana lay motionless on a thin blanket, her usually bright eyes dull and distant. She didn't respond to the noises around her. A trained service dog's discipline transformed into depression. Nana, I whispered, dropping to my knees outside the kennel door. Her head lifted instantly, eyes focusing on me with such intensity it nearly knocked me backward. A whine built in her throat, followed by her distinct alert bark, the one reserved for finding me after we'd been separated. That's certainly a recognition response, Carol commented, watching our interaction. She's trained to alert to my seizures before they happen, I explained, fingers gripping the kennel door. She can detect chemical changes up to 45 minutes before an episode. Without her, I could have a seizure while driving, cooking, or bathing. She's not just emotional support, She's seizure detection, emergency response, and medical alert all in one. As if understanding her job was being discussed, Nana stood at attention, her demeanor transforming from defeated shelter animal to working service dog despite the absence of her vest. "There's still the matter of the surrender paperwork," Carol said, though her tone had softened considerably. "Your parents legally signed." "They had no legal right to surrender property they don't own," Rachel interjected. "Would you allow someone's parents to surrender their wheelchair or hearing aids?" Carol sighed. "Let me make some calls. This may take some time to resolve." "I'm not leaving without her," I stated firmly. "I'll sign whatever temporary custody forms you need, but she's coming home with me today." While Carol made calls, Nana remained fixated on me through the kennel door, occasionally pawing at it when I moved too far away. A shelter volunteer brought me a chair, placing it directly in front of Nana's kennel. "She wouldn't eat since arriving," the volunteer whispered. Now we know why. An hour later, the shelter director himself arrived. Apparently, Dr. Patterson's calls had reached the highest levels of the organization. Dr. Martin was a veterinarian with 30 years of experience and, fortunately, knowledge of service animal law. "This is straightforward from a legal perspective," he explained after reviewing my documentation. "Service animals are considered medical equipment under federal law. The ADA protects your right to this assistance, regardless of family disputes. The surrender was invalid from the beginning." He turned to Carol. "Prepare release paperwork for medical equipment improperly surrendered. Note potential legal implications for the shelter and document everything thoroughly." To me, he added, "You would have grounds for legal action against both your parents and potentially this facility. I'm hoping resolving this immediately mitigates those concerns." Within 20 minutes, Nana was released to my custody. The moment the kennel door opened, she pressed her body against my legs, performing a quick check of my physical state as she'd been trained. Finding me seizure-free but emotionally distraught, she settled into her alerting position, her body weight providing comforting pressure. "That's clearly a trained response," Dr. Martin observed. "I've worked with many service dogs, and that bond can't be faked." As we completed the paperwork, Dr. Martin explained that they would document this as an improper surrender of medical equipment rather than an animal adoption return. "This documentation may be important if you decide to pursue legal action," he advised. "What your parents did potentially violated several laws protecting individuals with disabilities." The word legal action echoed in my mind as Rachel drove us home, Nana pressed against me in the back seat. I'd never considered taking legal action against my own family. The thought seemed unthinkable before today, but so had the possibility they would steal my service animal while I slept under their roof. By evening, Nana and I were safely home in my apartment. She refused to leave my side even for a moment, her training temporarily overridden by the trauma of our separation. As the adrenaline of the rescue mission faded, my phone buzzed with messages from my parents, alternating between anger at me retrieving Nana and justifications for their actions. I silenced the phone, buried my face in Nana's fur, and tried to process how the people who had raised me could so fundamentally misunderstand or disregard my medical needs. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider what legal options might protect both Nana and myself from ever experiencing this betrayal again. The initial fallout arrived by Sunday evening in a barrage of text messages and voicemails from my family. Mom vacillated between tearful pleas to understand their financial situation and passive-aggressive comments about my overreaction. Dad's messages were terse, focusing on practical matters like retrieving the rest of my belongings from their house. Jason, predictably, was the most direct. "It's just a dog. Family comes first." Each message revealed how fundamentally they misunderstood. Nana wasn't just a dog, she was the difference between independence and institutionalization, between driving and relying on others for transportation, between holding a job and collecting disability. The $100 monthly they thought they were saving on her premium food was nothing compared to the freedom she provided. Extended family soon joined the fray. Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister and a registered nurse, called to offer her unequivocal support. What they did was dangerous and illegal, she stated bluntly. Your cousin Ryan is finishing law school. He says you have a solid case for conversion of property and possibly emotional distress. Meanwhile, my paternal grandparents defended their son's actions. Your parents are struggling financially. They thought they were making the best decision for everyone, Grandma explained gently, as if speaking to a child refusing to share toys. I made the difficult decision to block my immediate family's numbers temporarily. Each conversation elevated my stress levels, and by Monday morning, the consequences of that stress became dangerously apparent. The seizure struck while I was making breakfast. Nana alerted just 15 minutes before, less warning than usual, likely due to my elevated stress hormones masking the typical chemical changes she detected. Still, it was enough time to move away from the hot stove, take emergency medication, and position myself safely on the living room carpet. When consciousness returned, Nana lay pressed against my side in her recovery position, preventing me from rolling or injuring myself during the disorienting post-seizure phase. My tongue was sore from biting it, a common occurrence during seizures. The kitchen timer beeped insistently where I'd left eggs cooking. This seizure, my first in nearly 3 weeks, highlighted exactly why Nana was essential. Without her warning, I could have fallen against the stove, been driving, or been alone in the shower. The potential consequences ranged from minor burns to fatal accidents. My neurologist fit me in for an emergency appointment that afternoon. Dr. Patterson documented the seizure and its probable connection to the emotional trauma of the weekend's events. The medical literature is clear that stress is a significant seizure trigger for many epilepsy patients, she explained, updating my chart. What your parents did directly endangered your health by both removing your seizure alert system and inducing extreme stress. She printed an updated medical necessity letter for my records. This clearly states that separation from your service animal constitutes a direct threat to your health and safety. I've included citations to relevant medical studies and detailed your specific case history. As we discussed medication adjustments to manage the stress-induced increase in seizure activity, Dr. Patterson asked the question I'd been avoiding. Have you considered legal action? What they did wasn't just hurtful, it was potentially life-threatening. The following day, I met with a disability rights advocate recommended by my epilepsy support group. Sandra Carter had 20 years of experience navigating the complex legal landscape of disability accommodations and service animal rights. Let's break down exactly what Nana provides, Sandra suggested, opening a spreadsheet on her tablet. Then we'll calculate what these services would cost without her. We listed each function: seizure detection 30 to 45 minutes prior to episodes, emergency medication retrieval, alerting others during a seizure, providing stabilization during and after episodes, preventing injury during falls, and offering mobility support during post-seizure confusion. Now for the financial reality, Sandra continued. Private in-home medical monitoring would cost approximately $4,000 monthly. A full-time medical assistant qualified to administer emergency medications would be around $5,000 monthly. Emergency response services with guaranteed under 30-minute arrival times average $1,500 monthly. And that's not counting the lost independence, ability to drive, or maintain employment. The total shocked me. Approximately $83,000 annually for services that Nana provided naturally, with greater efficiency and without privacy invasion. Insurance typically covers none of these alternatives, Sandra added. They'd rather pay for emergency room visits after injuries than prevention. And they certainly won't cover 24/7 in-home care. She set down her tablet, expression serious. Your parents' actions have potentially massive legal implications. By removing your medical alert system, They directly endangered your life and violated several provisions of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Insurance complications emerged next. My health insurance case manager called Wednesday morning, concerned about the reported service animal separation. Your care plan is predicated on having seizure alert assistance, she explained. Without that, we'd need to reclassify your risk category, which could affect coverage for independent living. The financial reality became increasingly clear. Without Nana, I would potentially lose my insurance coverage for living independently, lose my ability to drive safely, and consequently lose my job. The $100 monthly my parents thought they were saving could have cost me everything. By Thursday, I'd made the difficult decision to consult with a disability rights attorney. Catherine Jimenez specialized in service animal law and had successfully handled several cases involving family interference with service animals. Unfortunately, your situation isn't unique, Catherine explained during our consultation. Family members often fail to understand the legal status of service animals and the potentially serious consequences of interfering with them. She outlined 3 potential legal claims: conversion of property, taking my service animal without permission, intentional infliction of emotional distress, knowingly causing psychological harm through their actions, and violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, interfering with my legally protected accommodations. I recommend starting with a formal demand letter, Catherine suggested. It outlines the legal violations, requests specific remedies, and establishes that you're serious about protecting your rights. Many cases resolve at this stage when people understand the potential consequences of their actions. The letter would request financial compensation for the emotional distress and increased medical costs resulting from their actions, a formal written apology acknowledging Nana's status as medical equipment, and a legally binding agreement never to interfere with my service animal again. What about my brother? I asked, suspecting Jason's gambling debts were the real financial drain my parents were trying to address. If he encouraged your parents to surrender the service animal knowing its purpose, he could potentially share liability, Catherine explained. Family dynamics are complicated, but the law regarding service animals is quite clear. As Catherine drafted the demand letter, I struggled with conflicting emotions. These were my parents, the people who had supported me through diagnosis, driven me to countless medical appointments, and helped fundraise for Nana initially. How had we reached this point of legal threats and broken trust? Yet each time Nana alerted me to an oncoming seizure, 3 more times that week alone due to elevated stress, I was reminded of exactly what my parents had risked with their actions. This wasn't about choosing a service animal over family. It was about recognizing that my medical needs weren't optional luxuries to be sacrificed for financial convenience. By Friday afternoon, Catherine's demand letter was ready for my review. Reading the formal legal language describing my parents' actions made the situation feel simultaneously more real and more surreal. The letter established a 2-week deadline for response before we would proceed with formal legal action. As I authorized Catherine to send the letter by certified mail, I wondered how my family would react when confronted with the legal and financial reality of what they had done. Would they finally understand Nana's essential role in my life, or would this legal escalation destroy our relationship permanently? The certified letter arrived at my parents' house on Monday. By Monday evening, the real confrontation began. Dad called first, his voice oscillating between disbelief and indignation. A lawsuit? Against your own parents? After everything we've done for you. What exactly did you expect would happen when you stole my medical equipment? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Did you think I'd just accept it and move on? It's a dog, Melissa, not a wheelchair, he countered, the comparison revealing exactly how little he understood about Nana's function. We're drowning in medical bills. Your mother and I haven't had a vacation in 5 years. The second mortgage is killing us. You thought stealing my service animal while I slept was an acceptable solution to your financial problems, I finished for him. Did you consider what would happen if I had a seizure while driving without Nana's warning? Or fell in the shower? Or lost my job because I couldn't safely live independently? His silence suggested these considerations had never crossed his mind. The letter outlines exactly what Nana provides and what it would cost without her, I continued. Read it carefully. Then we can talk about reasonable solutions that don't involve endangering my life. Mom called next, tears evident in her voice. We never meant to hurt you, sweetie. We just didn't think it through. Your father's heart medication doubled in price. Jason needed help with his apartment deposit. Everything happened at once. The mention of Jason reignited my anger. So Jason's apartment deposit was more important than my safety? More important than the service animal that prevents me from having potentially fatal accidents? That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. Jason has his own struggles. His gambling addiction isn't a medical necessity, I said bluntly. That's what this comes down to. You chose to enable Jason's addiction over supporting my documented medical needs. The family intervention attempt came Wednesday evening. Grandma called to announce they were hosting a family dinner to work things out reasonably, without lawyers. Despite my reservations, I agreed to attend with one condition: Nana would accompany me. The gathering at my grandparents' house included my parents, Jason, Aunt Patricia, and Uncle Robert. Nana stayed close by my side, occasionally scanning the room for potential threats, her training responding to the tension radiating from everyone present. Grandpa, always the family peacemaker, opened the discussion. We're here because we love Melissa and want to resolve this situation as a family. No one intended harm. Aunt Patricia, the only healthcare professional in the family, shook her head. Intent doesn't matter when it comes to patient safety. Removing a seizure alert service animal is like disconnecting someone's heart monitor because the beeping is annoying. Dad bristled. That's not a fair comparison. We were trying to make difficult financial decisions for the whole family. Then let's talk about those financial decisions, I suggested calmly. Let's discuss why Jason's gambling debts keep getting paid while my medical needs are considered optional expenses. The room fell silent. Jason stared at his plate while my parents exchanged panicked glances. That's private family business, Mom finally said. So is my medical care, I countered. But you made that public when you surrendered Nana to a shelter with a story about not being able to afford pets. Jason finally looked up. I didn't ask them to get rid of your dog. That wasn't my idea. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Not directly, no. But you did suggest we needed to cut unnecessary expenses. And you classified my seizure alert service dog as an unnecessary expense? I asked incredulously. We thought you could manage without her, Mom explained weakly. Your medication has been working better lately. It's been working better because Nana alerts me early enough to take emergency medication before seizures become severe, I explained for what felt like the 100th time. Without those early warnings, I'd likely be hospitalized multiple times monthly. Uncle Robert, who had remained quiet until now, leaned forward. Let's be practical about this. The lawyer's letter mentions significant financial damages. None of us want this to go to court, but these are serious allegations. Dad's face hardened. Is that what this is about? Money? After everything we've done for you. This is about recognition and respect, I corrected him. Recognition that Nana is essential medical equipment, not a pet. Respect for my right to live independently with appropriate accommodations for my disability. And if we can't afford these damages? Dad asked, making air quotes around the word. The letter outlines options, I said. Financial compensation is only one possibility. I'm also requesting a formal acknowledgement of Nana's status and a legally binding agreement not to interfere with my service animal again. This feels like extortion, Jason muttered. Aunt Patricia fixed him with a stern look. No, this is consequences. Actions have them. Taking someone's medically necessary service animal has legal and financial consequences. The conversation deteriorated from there. Mom cried. Dad made ultimatums. Jason alternated between defensiveness and accusation. Through it all, Nana remained alert at my side, occasionally pressing against my leg when my heart rate elevated, performing her job flawlessly despite the chaos around her. Finally, Dad issued his ultimatum. Drop this legal nonsense or consider yourself no longer part of this family. We won't be blackmailed by our own daughter. I stood slowly, gathering Nana's leash. I've brought documentation of every time Nana has alerted to seizures in the past month. 15 alerts, potentially 15 emergency room visits prevented. I've brought statements from my neurologist, my employer accommodations paperwork, and insurance coverage details explaining how Nana makes my independent living possible. I placed the folder on the table. Read these. Understand what Nana actually provides. Then consider what would have happened if I'd had a seizure while driving after you took her. I turned to leave, then paused. And understand this. Without Nana, I cannot work. Without work, I cannot pay rent. Without independent living, I would need to apply for disability benefits and subsidized housing. The financial support you occasionally provide would become full financial responsibility. The $100 monthly you thought you were saving on dog food would turn into thousands in necessary support. As Nana and I walked out, I delivered my own ultimatum. You have until the deadline in the letter to acknowledge your mistake and make it right. After that, this becomes a legal matter rather than a family one. The drive home was silent except for Nana's occasional comforting whine. I wondered if I'd just permanently severed my relationship with my family over what they still saw as just a dog. But every time I glanced at Nana, alert and watchful in the passenger seat, I was reminded of what was really at stake: my independence, safety, and dignity. 3 days after the disastrous family meeting, disaster struck in the form of my worst seizure in years. I was working from home, Nana resting beside my desk chair, when she suddenly became intensely alert. Her warning behavior was unusually urgent, pawing at my leg, whining sharply, and tugging at my sleeve toward the couch. The intensity suggested an oncoming seizure, more severe than usual. I barely had time to activate the seizure response function on my smartwatch, take emergency medication, and position myself safely before consciousness slipped away. What happened next I know only from medical reports and the smartwatch data. The seizure lasted over 4 minutes, dangerously long and classified as status epilepticus, a condition that can cause permanent brain damage or death if not promptly treated. Nana, trained for this worst-case scenario, activated my emergency response system by pressing the specialized button on my smart device with her paw, something she'd been trained to do only in severe situations. When paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, they found Nana performing her post-seizure protocols, keeping me on my side in recovery position, preventing me from injuring myself during the disoriented phase, and barking intermittently to attract attention from neighbors. I regained consciousness in the ambulance, confused and unable to speak coherently. Nana had been allowed to accompany me due to her service animal vest and the paramedics' recognition of her critical role. She lay pressed against me on the gurney, a constant familiar presence through the disorienting emergency. At the hospital, Dr. Patterson was called in as my neurologist. Her assessment was unequivocal. This seizure could have been fatal without the service animal's intervention. The emergency medication administered during the warning phase likely prevented brain damage, and the emergency response activation ensured timely medical intervention. She documented everything thoroughly, adding to the growing medical record supporting Nana's essential role. Without question, she wrote in my chart, the service animal's intervention was life-saving in this instance. During my overnight hospital stay for observation, my phone remained silent from family. No one had been notified of my hospitalization. I'd removed my parents from my emergency contacts after the shelter incident, replacing them with Rachel and Aunt Patricia. This silence felt both painful and validating. They remained unaware of how close I'd come to severe injury or death without Nana's intervention. The next morning, Dr. Patterson provided a detailed letter for my legal case. This incident conclusively demonstrates the life-saving function of your service animal, she explained. Any argument that the dog is merely a convenience or optional support is medically indefensible. Released from the hospital with instructions to rest and monitor for aftereffects, I returned home to find a certified letter from my parents' newly retained attorney. Rather than addressing the demands in my letter, they were preparing to contest the allegations, claiming they had partial ownership of Nana due to their contribution to the original fundraising campaign. The legal escalation felt inevitable but still painful. Catherine filed the formal lawsuit the following day, including the new medical documentation from my hospitalization. The filing included claims for conversion of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of disability protection laws. What I hadn't anticipated was media interest. A paralegal at Catherine's firm apparently mentioned the unusual case to a friend at the local newspaper. By week's end, a carefully worded article appeared. Local woman sues parents for surrendering $28,000 service dog to shelter. The article was factually accurate but necessarily simplified, focusing on the most sensational aspects of the case. It mentioned the fundraising campaign, the specialized training, and the shelter surrender, along with quotes from disability advocates about service animal protections under federal law. My phone exploded with notifications as the story spread from local news to disability advocacy networks. The National Epilepsy Foundation reached out offering legal support. Service dog training organizations contacted Catherine about providing expert testimony. My inbox filled with messages from other people with disabilities sharing similar stories of family members not understanding or respecting their accommodations. The publicity had an unexpected effect on my parents. Dad called for the first time since our confrontation, his voice subdued. "The newspaper makes us sound like monsters," he said quietly. "The newspaper reported facts," I replied, too exhausted from my recent hospitalization for anger. "You took my medical equipment without consent and surrendered it to a shelter. Those are simply facts." "Your mother hasn't stopped crying since the article came out," he continued. "Her principal called her in for a meeting. People at church are asking questions. This isn't just between us anymore." For the first time, I heard genuine regret rather than defensiveness in his voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he admitted. "We were desperate. The second mortgage, Jason's, issues. Everything was collapsing at once. So you sacrificed my safety?" I stated simply. His silence was answer enough. Later that day, Catherine called with news. "Your parents' attorney reached out about potential settlement discussions," she reported. Also, I received a concerning call from their mortgage company. Apparently, they've leveraged their house to pay legal fees and are facing potential foreclosure. The financial reality I'd warned about was materializing faster than expected. My parents had committed not just a moral error, but a financially catastrophic one. Fighting this lawsuit could cost them their home, retirement savings, and financial stability. The breaking point came 2 days later. Jason showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking haggard and unusually humble. "Can we talk?" he asked from the doorway, eyeing Nana warily where she stood protectively at my side. I allowed him in but maintained distance, Nana positioning herself between us as she'd been trained to do with people who triggered stress responses in me. "I need to tell you something," Jason began, sinking onto the edge of my couch. "Something Mom and Dad don't want anyone to know." He took a deep breath. "I have a gambling problem. Not just occasional betting, a full-blown addiction. I've lost over $60,000 in the past 2 years. Mom and Dad have been covering my debts, paying my rent when I couldn't, bailing me out repeatedly. Though I'd suspected this, hearing the confirmation still shocked me. And they chose to keep enabling your addiction while eliminating my medical support?" He nodded miserably. "They didn't see it as addiction until recently. They thought they were helping their son through temporary struggles. The weekend they took your dog, I just confessed to them about a $12,000 debt to some very dangerous people. So they panicked and decided Nana was an unnecessary expense, I concluded. It sounds awful saying it out loud, Jason admitted. I never specifically suggested getting rid of your service dog, but I did keep emphasizing how desperate my situation was. I manipulated them, played on their parental instincts. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. The lawsuit is going to ruin them financially. They've mortgaged everything, borrowed from their retirement accounts. Dad's talking about declaring bankruptcy. The moment of truth crystallized with painful clarity. My parents were on the verge of financial ruin, partly from enabling Jason's addiction, partly from medical expenses, and now from legal fees fighting a battle they couldn't win. And Jason, for the first time, was acknowledging his role in the family's dysfunction. What do you want from me? I asked quietly. Nothing I deserve, he replied. But Mom and Dad are asking if you'd consider meeting at the hospital tomorrow. Just talking, with Dr. Patterson present as a neutral medical authority. No lawyers. I considered refusing, protecting myself from further manipulation. But beneath the anger and hurt remained the complicated love of family, imperfect, sometimes toxic, but still the people who had shaped my life. I'll think about it, I said finally. But I need something from you first. Anything, Jason promised quickly. Call your gambling helpline right now, from my apartment, where I can hear you. Make an appointment with a counselor. Then show me confirmation. His face registered surprise, followed by resignation. He pulled out his phone, searched for the National Gambling Addiction Hotline, and made the call right there in my living room. 20 minutes later, he had an appointment with a counselor and had registered for a support group. It's a start, I acknowledged. Tell Mom and Dad I'll meet them tomorrow. But Nana comes with me, Dr. Patterson will be present, and I'm not dropping the lawsuit without significant changes from all of you. As Jason left, I wondered whether this family crisis might finally force the changes we'd all needed for years: accountability for Jason, financial reality for my parents, and recognition of my medical needs as non-negotiable necessities. The lawsuit had pushed us to the breaking point, but perhaps that's where healing could finally begin. The hospital conference room felt neutral and clinical, an appropriate setting for the difficult conversation ahead. Dr. Patterson had arranged for us to use the Epilepsy Center's family counseling space, complete with comfortable chairs and privacy. My parents arrived looking diminished somehow. Dad's confident posture had collapsed into a weary stoop. Mom's usually perfect appearance showed signs of neglect. Unpainted nails, minimal makeup, clothing chosen for comfort rather than appearance. Jason accompanied them, standing slightly apart as if unsure of his welcome in this fragile peace negotiation. Nana settled beside my chair in her working position, alert but calm. Dr. Patterson sat at the head of the small conference table, medical files open before her, embodying professional neutrality. Thank you all for coming, she began. I've agreed to facilitate this discussion at Melissa's request, but I want to be clear that my primary concern is her medical well-being. With that said, I believe family support is an important component of managing any chronic condition. Dad cleared his throat. Before anything else, I need to say something. He looked directly at me for the first time since entering. We were wrong. Completely, inexcusably wrong. What we did endangered your life, violated your rights, and betrayed your trust. There's no justification, only context. The simple acknowledgement, delivered without defensiveness or qualification, loosened something tight in my chest. Mom reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. We've read everything: the medical records, the service dog certification, the financial breakdowns. We didn't understand, truly. We saw Nana as a pet, an emotional support, but not as essential medical equipment. The seizure reports were. Dad's voice cracked. Knowing how close you came to serious injury or worse, and that we contributed to that risk. I'll never forgive myself. Jason spoke next. I've been in counseling for 3 days. Not nearly enough, but enough to recognize how my addiction affected everyone. I manipulated mom and dad, created financial crises, then let the consequences fall on you. Dr. Patterson nodded appreciatively. Acknowledgement is the first step. Now we need to discuss practical solutions and protections moving forward. I'd prepared for this moment, consulting with both Catherine and Sandra about reasonable terms for potential settlement. I have 3 non-negotiable conditions, I stated calmly. First, legal recognition of Nana's status as medical equipment and a binding agreement never to interfere with my service animal again. My parents nodded immediately. Second, family education. All of you will complete the Service Animal Handler Family Training Program at the Epilepsy Foundation. It's 6 sessions that explain exactly what Nana does, how she works, and legal protections for service animals. We'll do it, Mom agreed quickly. Third, Jason's recovery becomes a family priority equal to my medical management. I turned to my brother. That means addiction counseling, gambling restriction apps on your devices, financial transparency, and no more bailouts that compromise anyone's health or safety. Jason swallowed hard. I've already started. I've given mom and dad complete access to my bank accounts, installed blocking software, and scheduled therapy 3 times weekly. Dad added, we've frozen our credit, changed all financial passwords, and contacted a financial advisor specializing in addiction recovery. We're learning to stop enabling. These were positive steps, but I needed to address the lawsuit directly. These conditions address future behavior, but there's still the matter of legal consequences for what already happened. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We'll accept whatever financial penalties are required. The house is already mortgaged to the limit, but we can sell it, access retirement funds early. That's not what I want, I interrupted. Financial devastation won't help any of us. I've discussed alternative settlement terms with my attorney. I outlined the agreement Catherine had helped draft. My parents would make a modest monthly payment toward a medical trust for my ongoing care. Jason would perform community service hours at the Service Dog Training Center where Nana had been trained. Most importantly, they would participate in creating educational materials for families about service animal rights and responsibilities. This isn't about punishment, I explained. It's about ensuring this doesn't happen to someone else's service animal because their family didn't understand. The relief on their faces was palpable. Dad reached for his wallet, extracting a folded document. We've already started, he said, passing me the paper. It's a notarized statement acknowledging Nana's status as medical equipment and our commitment to respecting disability accommodations. We had our attorney draft it yesterday. The document represented a first step, small but significant. It showed initiative rather than mere compliance, suggesting genuine commitment to change. Dr. Patterson smiled slightly. I believe we have the foundation for moving forward. Melissa, are you comfortable with these initial steps? I nodded, feeling the weight of anger beginning to lighten. I'll have Catherine draw up formal settlement terms. But yes, this is a start. The legal resolution came together over the following weeks. Catherine worked with my parents' attorney to create a settlement agreement that protected my rights without financially destroying my family. The financial obligations were manageable, a small monthly payment into a medical trust for future care needs. The educational requirements were more substantial. Family therapy focusing on disability understanding, community service hours, and participation in creating a guide for families of service animal handlers. More difficult was rebuilding personal relationships after such fundamental betrayal. The first family dinner after this settlement felt awkward and strained. Mom hovered anxiously, constantly checking if I needed anything. Dad maintained careful distance from Nana, as if afraid even approaching her might violate some agreement. Jason sat quietly, 30-day sobriety chip from Gamblers Anonymous turning constantly between his fingers. Nana, sensing the tension, stayed in working mode rather than relaxing, as she typically would in familiar environments. Her hypervigilance reflected my own. Trust, once broken, couldn't be instantly restored by legal documents or verbal apologies. The family therapy sessions proved surprisingly valuable. Led by a counselor specializing in families affected by chronic medical conditions, they created space for difficult conversations about disability perceptions, financial boundaries, and rebuilding trust. My parents began to understand the daily realities of living with epilepsy. I gained insight into their financial anxieties and the manipulation they'd experienced from Jason's addiction. I think what happened, the therapist observed during our fourth session, was a perfect storm of misunderstanding, financial fear, and enabling patterns. You all lost sight of what was truly essential versus what was comfortable or convenient. Jason's recovery became an unexpected avenue for family healing. His commitment to gambling addiction treatment revealed a determination none of us had witnessed before. When he began volunteer work at the Service Dog Training Center, initially as part of his settlement obligations, but continuing long after his required hours were completed, he developed genuine appreciation for the animal's capabilities. I watched a dog alert to a blood sugar drop 30 minutes before the handler's monitor detected it, he told me with astonishment after one volunteer shift. It wasn't training or tricks. These animals are performing medical miracles. 6 months after the shelter incident, my parents sold their oversized family home, not due to financial necessity as initially feared, but as a conscious choice to downsize into a more manageable property. The excess from the sale went partly toward Jason's gambling debts and partly into my medical trust. We should have done this years ago, Mom admitted as we packed photo albums in their living room. We kept trying to maintain appearances while everything crumbled underneath. The house became more important than the people living in it. The educational materials we created together became unexpectedly impactful. What began as a settlement obligation evolved into a passion project, a comprehensive guide for families of service animal handlers explaining legal protections, proper interactions, and the critical distinction between pets and working animals. Several disability advocacy organizations adopted the materials for their websites, and the local school district implemented them in staff training. As months passed, Nana and I settled into a new relationship with my family. Trust rebuilt slowly, in small moments of respect and understanding. Dad began carrying backup supplies for Nana in his car, her special food, extra medication, spare service vest. Mom stopped referring to her as the dog and used her name instead, acknowledging her working status. Jason asked appropriate questions about her training and capabilities, genuinely interested rather than dismissive. At the 1-year mark after the incident, we gathered for a quiet celebration of progress. Not perfect healing. The scars remained visible in moments of hesitation or careful phrasing, but genuine growth nonetheless. I've been thinking about what this experience taught me, I said as we finished dinner. Initially, I thought it was about standing up for myself, demanding respect for my medical needs. Dad nodded encouragingly. But the deeper lesson was about communication and education, I continued. You didn't understand what Nana truly provides because I never fully explained it. I assumed this certification and training would speak for themselves. We should have asked better questions, Mom acknowledged. Instead of seeing the cost, we should have seen the value. Jason, now 14 months sober from gambling, added his perspective. I've learned that addiction makes you completely self-centered. I couldn't see beyond my own needs, so I certainly couldn't recognize yours. As Nana rested her head on my lap, no longer in constant working mode around my family, I reflected on our journey. The legal battle had been necessary but insufficient for true healing. The harder work had been rebuilding trust, establishing boundaries, and creating understanding. There's something powerful in learning to advocate for your needs without destroying relationships in the process, I observed. It's a balance I'm still figuring out. Dad reached across the table, gently squeezing my hand. We're learning together. That's what family should be. The betrayal would always remain part of our history. The note, "Gave Nana to shelter. Can't afford pets when family needs help with bills," was seared into my memory. But alongside it now existed new moments. Dad researching epilepsy management techniques, Mom attending service dog demonstration events, Jason volunteering weekends at the training center. Healing wasn't forgetting or pretending the harm never occurred. It was building something new on the foundation of hard lessons and genuine accountability. It was recognizing that sometimes the people who hurt us most can also become our strongest advocates once they truly understand. As I watch Nana sleeping peacefully beside me now, no longer vigilant around my family, I realize that true healing happens when protection no longer requires constant defense. The boundaries remain, but the walls between us have slowly lowered, allowing connection without compromising safety. Have you ever had to make difficult choices between family loyalty and self-protection? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest part of any journey is knowing when to draw boundaries and when to offer second chances. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need to hear that advocating for your needs isn't selfish. It's essential. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most profound healing begins with the word no.